This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Shalom Aleichem. Hope everyone's having a good day. Okay, we begin today, Tuesday, Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. Zman Matan Toraseinu. You know, Rav Nachman says, Tammuz is Rosh Tevos. Zman Matan Toraseinu. So today we begin Perek Beis of Devorah, and as we mentioned, Devorah is part of the corpus of tremendous material that the Ramak wrote, and we know the Ramak was one of the all-time great Mekubalim, and therefore much of what he writes is really rooted in Kabbalah. We didn't see it so much in Perek Aleph, but as the Prakim continue, we will see that much of this is Kabbalistic, and therefore we're not really going to be able to explain fully much of the Kabbalistic elements that the Devorah is bringing out. So basically what we're going to try to do is we're going to try our best to translate the Kabbalistic parts and really focus more on those aspects that are relevant to us Lamaisa. I just want to begin, like we have in the past, about the importance of a person in general dedicating a great effort to improving one's midos, and really this should be a very fundamental part of one's avodas Hashem, the avodas hamidos. The Vilna Gaon writes, it's brought in Ksav Yad, midos heim avnei haTorah v'sharsha. Midos are really the stones of the Torah and their root. In other words, the foundation of the whole Torah are midos tovos. That's why Reb Chaim Vital writes in the Shari Kedusha that even though midos are so important and one would have expected to find a great discussion about midos in the Torah, nevertheless, it's even more fundamental than that. The mashal being, if you ask someone to build a house for you, you don't have to write the foundation and the architectural plans. That goes without saying. Likewise, the Torah doesn't need to discuss midos because the midos are really the foundation upon which the Torah is built. Now, much of Devorah is predicated on the concept that there are 10 spheros. Now, what are these 10 spheros? So, for lack of better terminology, we call them 10 manifestations of divine light. If you look in the Ben Ish Chai, in his commentary, Oid Yosef Chai on Parshas Vayishlach, the Ben Ish Chai says that the spheros are called oiros, they're called light, not because they're actual light, just because light is the most sublime material that exists in the world. So this allows, this sort of is l'saber es ha'oyin, es ha'aznayim. This sort of explains to us what these concepts are, despite the fact that light is not really the perfect analogy over here. The concept is that for God to relate to this world directly, we are so low and insignificant, we cannot exist if God would deal directly through us, and therefore He does so through the medium of the Esser Spheros. Now, the Esser Spheros in no way define God, Chas v'shalom, and in no way does any Middah define God. God does not have Midos in the sense that we have Midos. We have Midos, sometimes we use a certain mode of conduct, sometimes we use another. God does not utilize midos because God is intrinsically echad, He is perfectly one. He's not sometimes merachim and sometimes He executes din. That is just the way it is manifest to us. So the concept of spheros are not for the essence of God, but merely for the way that He relates to His bruim. That's the basic concept of spheros. And the 10 spheros in Rav Goldberg's edition of Devorah, he has sort of a diagram of what the 10 spheros are. In the back he has a little kuntris, and the top sphera is called spheras Kesser. Kesser could also be called Das. Das is the highest of the sphera, and that is the one that God relates directly to us, because the top of our head is the Kesser. Coming down from Das, from Kesser, is known as Chachma and Bina. So it's Chachma, Bina, and Das. And then you have the 7 spheros, which directly are the avenues through which God effectuates and influences this world. The one which most directly interrelates and most directly is the one with which God carries out providence in this world is Middah of Malchus. So Malchus in a way is the seventh, but it's also the most bottom. So you have Chesed and Devorah. Chesed is Midas HaChesed, Devorah is Midas HaDin. Tiferes sort of mixes the two, is Memazeg the two. That's where the two come to confluence. You have Netzach and Hoid, which are opposite Midos in a sense. They come together at Yesoid, and Malchus is the Middah through which God sort of interrelates with this world. That's just the words of it. Don't think that, I explained it and therefore the listener thinks I really should understand it. I did not offer explanation. And if you don't understand it, then it's not lacking in you, it's lacking in the explanation given. But those are the words, and it's at least worthwhile to be familiar with the words. We're now going to discuss in Parak Beis the Middah that is called Middas HaKesser. And Middas HaKesser is the most sublime and supreme of all the Middos. Says the Talmud Devorah, Oid liyos ha'adam doimel l'kaina. It's interesting, the Talmud Devorah began that we need to emulate Hashem, specifically referenced in Parak Aleph, all the way in the beginning, is that Lefikach roi sheyadame el pu'ulais HaKesser. We need to emulate the actions of the Middah of Kesser, and that is the Middah we're going to discuss now. It is the most sublime and highest of all the Middos. So we need to be similar to our Creator, Besoid Midas HaKesser, and the secret of Midas HaKesser. Tzarach sheyia by kama gufei fu'ulais. We need to have many bodies of action, shehem ikar hahanhaga, which is the main conduct, it's translated here, of this Middah. In other words, we have to possess different modes which represent the fundamental nature of the Middah of Kesser. And the most telling and the most essential of the Middos HaKesser, Harishayna, the first, HaKolelas HaKo, which encompasses everything, He Midas Ha'anav, is the Middah of humility. Humility is the most defining aspect of Midas HaKesser, Mibnei Shehi Tluya B'Kesser, because it is contingent on the Middah of Kesser, Shaharehi Middah Al Kal HaMiddos. Kesser is the highest of all the Middos. It does not elevate itself or raise itself above. The Middah of Kesser, being it is most high, it is the highest of all the Middos, therefore it is always focused downward. So by definition, something that is always the highest point, there's only one way to turn, and that is down. Likewise, Kesser, which is the highest of the Middos, only really has one vantage point, and that is to gaze down. Why is that? And the Talmud Devorah offers two rationales. V'zeh mishnei tam, this for two reasons. Number one, ho'echad shehu boish lehistakel b'sibasai. Kesser is embarrassed to gaze at its cause. Now, what in the world does that mean? My understanding is that since Kesser is the highest Middah, and the Middah that intrinsically is rooted most in the Ribono Shel Olam, in other words, the way that God deals with the world, He's influencing through Kesser, then to Chachma, then to Bina, then to Chesed. But the one most directly interrelated to God Himself is Kesser. And therefore, if Kesser were to turn upward to God Himself, it would be shameful. So Kesser has no choice but to gaze downward. He's embarrassed to look at who caused him, who created him. Ela ma'atziloi mabit boitam leitivai. It is the one who hewn out Kesser, that is God, who's constantly gazing down on Kesser to bestow goodness to it. And what does Kesser do? Kesser in turn turns downward. Again, if you say you don't understand this, that's better than if you said I did understand it, okay? So it's better than the alternative. But again, these midos, these spheroids are the arenas or the lights which the Mekubalim refer to, and as we said from the Ben Ish Chai, light is just an analogy, but they are the platform through which God interacts with this world. So Kesser is the highest platform. Kesser is embarrassed to look back up at God, instead it looks down at the other spheroids. So if we were to emulate Kesser, we too, the way to emulate that would be to turn downward, to look downward. A person should be ashamed to look upward and to be exalted, but instead, a person should constantly gaze downward. To make himself as low as he possibly can. V'harei hamida hazois hitluya derech klal barosh. This midah is expressed most in a person's head, because haughtiness is very much displayed through head position. She'ein adam is goya ela b'haramas rosh. A person is only arrogant through the raising up of his head. Klape mala, upwardly. Ve'ha'anav mashbo rosh lamata. The anav gazes downwards. So the way that this midah is most manifest is through the position of the head. Therefore, the Talmud Devorah continues. Ve'ha'anav mashbo rosh lamata. The anav lowers his head below. Now, v'harei ein savlon va'anav. There is no one more tolerant or humble. We see from here that tolerance and humility go hand in hand. There's no one more tolerant, kelokeinu, like God, b'midas ha-kesser, in the midah of Kesser. In other words, it sounds like the midah of anivos is most prominently recognized through the midah of Kesser. She tachlis rachamim. Because the midah of Kesser is the epitome of mercy. As we mentioned in the midah of Yichbosh Avanosenu, God does not let sin grow up and flourish up and have influence in the upper worlds. God suppresses it. No deficiency enters before God. No sin. No judgment. No bad character trait will allow God to stop divinely involving himself in our affairs and bestowing kindness on us constantly. In other words, this is the greatest act of humility, the greatest manifestation of humility, where the Rebbeinu Shalom does not allow any deficiency, any shortcoming, any sin to enter before him. Instead, Midas HaKesser is always gazing down, trying to be mashpia toiva on us. So what does this have to do with us? That there should be nothing that anyone in this world could do that should stop us from acting in a way of bestowing kindness on them. Kach tzarcha adam. Likewise, a person is obligated. Shesham siba shaba'olam. There should be no cause in the world. Lo yisimna eyo melahitiv. Should not prevent us from showing kindness. V'sham avain. No sin that anyone did. Oy masa b'nei adam. Or act of man, bilti hagon, which is inappropriate. Lo yikanes lefanav. Doesn't mean you shouldn't see it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't know it. But at least it should not affect you, that it will in any way interfere with your bestowal of kindness on anybody. From doing good to those who need your goodness. At any time and any moment. And therefore, just give me 2 more minutes. Just like God is sitting on high. And He's sustaining the largest creatures, the horns of the mighty Re'im. God is sustaining these tiny microscopic eggs of a louse. Here you can have this microscopic creature and it lays an egg, and that egg is being sustained by God. God at no time says this is too unimportant, too insignificant. This is beneath my dignity. God does not look down on any creation. There is no creation that God looks down on. If God would look down on a creature, in other words, let's say God had a certain attitude, chas v'sham. Well, this is beneath my dignity. Nobody could exist for a moment, because objectively we are all beneath God's dignity. For God to supply us with breakfast, lunch, and supper, there is no one alive who could say, I meet the threshold of being deserving that God should pay attention to me. God never says, Yankel, Beryl, Shmerel is beneath my dignity. God pays attention and shows mercy to everyone. So too it is our responsibility. Someone could come into our shul, into our house, and they could be covered in boils. They could be disgusting looking. They could be despicable. Their actions could be completely inappropriate, and yet there is no one who is beneath our dignity of deserving of our kindness. Therefore, we need to bestow kindness on everyone. Nobody should be disgraced. Nobody should be looked down upon. Nobody should be deemed unworthy. Afilu bria kala shebakalos. Even the lowest of the low, the most insignificant of insignificant. Tia me'oid chashuva be'enav. The man could be out of a job. He could not read the Aleph Beis. He never did anything good in his life, and in our mind's eye, this person should be chashuv shebachashuvim, because the value that God ascribes to us, vis-a-vis our relative worth between us and the Ribono Shel Olam, Hashem does a lot more in terms of the value He places on us than would be required for us to do to any human being. V'yitein daitoi aleh, we should put significance on this individual. V'yetiv l'chol hamitzarech el toivasai, we should bestow kindness on anyone who needs. V'zu Middah tluya b'Kesser, this is a Middah dependent on the Middah of Kesser, which is the highest of all the Middahs, which is represented by the position of the head, because the position of the head represents either arrogance or humility, besoid harosh derech klal, in the secret of the head in a general sense. So while we may not understand fully the Kabbalistic references, nevertheless, the upshot we understand, and that is, there is nothing, there is no one, there is no situation, there's no human being who the Ribono Shel Olam looks down upon. His kindness extends to all, and therefore we should emulate that majestic Middah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, wishing everyone a great day. Be'ezus Hashem, we'll pick it up tomorrow. Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.